Gamera vs. Barugon was the second film in the Gamera series, and it's where the franchise really started becoming what it's known for, Gamera fighting another monster. The first movie had done well, surprisingly well, so Daiei wasted no time in rushing out a sequel the very next year. This time they upped the budget, aiming for a more serious tone and wanting to compete directly with Toho's Godzilla. Behind the scenes, the push from Daiei came from President Masaichi Nagata. He'd been skeptical of the original Gamera film at first, but changed his tune after it turned a profit. For the sequel, Nagata didn't want another scrappy low-budget gamble. He wanted something prestigious, so he gave the green light for a significantly larger budget and treated the production as an A-list title. Unlike the original, which was shot in black and white and made with limited resources, Gamera vs. Barugon was filmed in full color using Daiei's in-house widescreen format. But figuring out what kind of story to tell took some trial and error. Early drafts were wildly different from the final product. One of the earliest pitches was called Gamera vs. the Icemen from Outer Space. That version was packed with flying saucers, volcanic eruptions, and an apocalyptic blizzard caused by alien invaders. Another treatment toyed with a Scandinavian ice giant, presumably to cash in on the mythological monster trend. Neither script made it past the developmental stage, but the cold-themed villain stuck, and that eventually became Barugon, a lizard-like creature who breathes a freezing mist, shooting a rainbow death ray from his back, and doesn't really resemble anything from Norse mythology anymore. Niisan Takahashi returned to write the screenplay after having worked on the original film. This would mark the beginning of his long tenure with the Gamera series, eventually writing every entry in the Showa era. For Barugon, he ditched the space aliens and leaned into something more grounded, a wartime story about buried treasure, betrayal, and hubris. The final script centers on a World War II veteran who returns to New Guinea to retrieve a mysterious opal that he buried during the war, only to find out that it's actually a giant monster egg. It's a much more adult film than the first, and really it's kind of the outlier from the rest of the series. Sure, Gamera vs. Gaios does have a bloodthirsty man-eating monster, but this film has no kids whatsoever in it. It really feels like an outlier, beyond Gamera being kind of evil in the first film, but beyond that, it's weird. Noriaki Yuasa, the director of the original Gamera film, was still involved, but he didn't direct. He was in a different role. Apparently, studio executives just didn't trust him to helm a prestigious project after the rough edges of the first film, so they brought in veteran director Shigeo Tanaka to take over. Tanaka was known for dramatic films, not kaiju, and reportedly approached the project with a more serious tone in mind from the start. Rather than being bitter about the change, Yuasa accepted a demotion to special effects director, but he still had significant creative input, particularly on the monster scenes, which he co-directed. According to Yuasa, the collaboration was smooth. He described their working relationship as being like a father and son, with Tanaka guiding the dramatic elements while Yuasa focused on the monster spectacle. The effects work itself was more ambitious than before. Barugon required a complex suit complete with a long tongue mechanism. The freezing mist was created using liquid nitrogen, something that looked great on camera but was hazardous to the suit actors who had to time their performances precisely to avoid injury. These practical challenges were very common in tokusatsu at the time, but Daiei's crew was trying to push the envelope, and the effort shows. As for the movie itself, Gamera vs. Barugon is one that I always overlooked as a kid. Part of that was the immature kid-brained assumption that Barugon was just a knockoff of Baragon from the Godzilla films. Trust me, we'll get there when we get there. But mostly, I just remember thinking that this movie was slow and kind of boring. It wasn't the kind of Saturday morning popcorn kaiju flick that lit my brain on fire. There wasn't any citywide destruction or wild energy right off the bat. There wasn't a goofy kid protagonist getting a front row seat to the monster fights. And for some reason, that mattered to me as a kid. I don't know why. But rewatching it now, I was surprised by how much I enjoyed it. There's something restrained and methodical about Barugon that I didn't appreciate until I got older. It's not a crowd pleaser in the usual sense, but it has its own kind of rhythm. If you're wondering why I changed my mind, or what this movie does right despite its reputation, then stay tuned. This is Gamera vs. Barugon. Really quick, I just want to announce that I will be attending G-Fest in Rosemont, Illinois on Sunday, July 13th. If you're planning to go, feel free to say hi. This will be my second time at G-Fest as a creator, and I'll be walking around most of the day checking out the panels and vendor booths. If you see me, don't be afraid to come up and say hi. Hope to see you there. 6 months after being trapped in space, Gamera is freed by a meteor and returns to Earth, absorbing energy from Kurobe Dam before flying off. Meanwhile, ex-soldier Ichiro sends his brother Keisuke to New Guinea to retrieve a giant opal he hid during World War II. Keisuke finds it, but his comrade Onodera betrays the group, killing one man and trying to take the treasure for himself. Back in Japan, the opal turns out to be an egg, and it hatches into Barugon, a giant monster with deadly ice breath and a rainbow death ray. Gamera tries to stop him but is frozen in battle. With the help of Karen, a New Guinea native, Keisuke works with the Japanese self-defense force to lure Barugon into a lake, using a diamond as bait. Onodera returns to steal it but is killed by Barugon. Gamera revives, defeats Barugon in a fierce fight, and peace is restored once more. Right off the bat, Gamera vs. Barugon is a massive step up from its predecessor, Gamera the Giant Monster. The most immediate difference is the switch from black and white to color. While I don't usually consider black and white to be a drawback, in fact, I love black and white movies, Gamera is a character that really benefits from a saturated and stylized environment. He's not a creature that thrives in muted tones or expressionist shadows. He feels at home in something closer to a graphic novel, something big, something bold, and something physical, and the color format really brings that out in a way that the original film just never could. The miniature work in this film is also genuinely impressive. A lot of that comes down to the wide depth of field that was used in the cinematography. Shots hold focus across multiple planes, which lets you really take in the scale of the destruction. It's unmistakably cheaper than what Toho was doing with the Godzilla series around the same time, as there's a noticeable flatness to some of the sets, and not all the destruction holds up under scrutiny, but the way it's shot sells the illusion better than it has any right to. You feel the size of the monsters, not just because they're towering over buildings, but because the camera gives their movements enough space to breathe. What also stands out is how the film commits to real horror in the human storyline. Early in the film, Kawajiri, Onodera, and Keisuke make their way through the jungle, and the atmosphere feels genuinely dangerous. There's a quicksand scene that's particularly brutal, with it being shot in a wide, unbroken take. It lets the moment stretch out uncomfortably as Kawajiri is slowly pulled under. It's not played for thrills or spectacle, and it definitely isn't comic relief. You're just stuck there watching as the other two try to pull him out. The sequence that follows, where Kawajiri is then stung by a scorpion and dies, doubles down on that horror. Yuzo Hayakawa gives a performance that goes way harder than you'd expect for this kind of material. He's clawing at the ground, convulsing, sweating. It's unnerving. None of it is exaggerated or cartoonish. It's a serious moment, and it works. What really makes the scene land, though, is how it builds Onodera as a genuinely despicable character. He watches the scorpion crawl up Kawajiri's leg and chooses to do nothing about it. There's no ambiguity. There's no moment of hesitation. It's a calculated decision to let someone die. That choice tells you everything you need to know about him. He's not the kind of villain that you roll your eyes at as he monologues endlessly. He's cold, cruel, and completely self-serving. A lot of that is in the writing, sure, but Koji Fujiyama brings this physical intimidation to the role that makes Onodera feel dangerous in a way that most human villains in kaiju films don't. He's not just evil in the abstract, he's more than capable of violence, and that violence feels personal. Even in the quieter scenes, the film doesn't let up. Akira Natsuki's performance as Ichiro is another high point. There's a moment where Onodera tells him that Keisuke is dead. Natsuki doesn't go big with it, there's no screaming, no melodramatic breakdown, but you can see the hurt. He's absorbing the information while also registering that something is off. And Onodera's performance in the same scene is just as layered. He's lying, but he's doing it in a way that sounds halfway sincere, which makes it even more unsettling. He's controlling the narrative while keeping his own role in the supposed death completely hidden. These kinds of scenes give the film a human core that actually works. The stakes feel earned, the emotions are grounded, and the performances elevate material that could have easily fallen flat. There are so many moments where I watch these scenes and I go, in another movie, this could have definitely been played for laughs. I think about the quicksand scene or the scorpion scene. All those could have just been joke scenes in, say, a Godzilla film that's set on an island and it becomes very goofy very fast. But here, in a genre where the human characters are often disposable or one note, Gamera vs. Barugon takes the time to make them count. One of the most frustrating aspects of the film, though, is the use of brownface. Japanese actors are made up to resemble tribespeople from New Guinea, darkening their skin and dressing in exaggerated, primitive costumes. This choice is jarring, and it immediately distances you from the world the film is trying to create. I already touched on this topic in my King Kong vs. Godzilla retrospective, where I had similar criticisms. While I understand that budget constraints and limited casting options played a role, the final result just doesn't sit well with me. Now, some people pushed back when I brought this up before in that King Kong vs. Godzilla retrospective, suggesting I was being too sensitive or arguing that Asian actors in brownface are somehow exempt from that criticism. I don't buy that. Regardless of the actor's background, the decision to depict a fictionalized indigenous tribe using dark makeup and stereotypes just hasn't aged well. These characters are hardly characters. They aren't given depth or cultural identity. They're just presented as set dressing, and they're there to signal a vague sense of the exotic. It's not full-blown minstrel performance or anything, but it still relies on caricature. There's a big difference between playing a character from another culture and flattening that culture into something cartoonish. The film's structure also raises a lot of problems. It begins with a very exciting sequence where Gamera returns to Earth and attacks a hydroelectric plant, giving us immediate action and spectacle, but he vanishes almost as quickly as he arrives. The story pivots into a grounded, human-focused plot involving three men trying to retrieve a mysterious opal. The tone shifts completely, and for a while, the movie feels like it belongs to another genre entirely. Hell, another film entirely. The kaiju aren't even mentioned for a long stretch of time, and the momentum from the opening disappears. That's not to say I'm brain-rotted and that it's like, oh, you need to talk about giant monsters all the time in your giant monster movie, but I love the human storyline. I think it's one of the more compelling plots in a Showa-era Gamera film. The tension between the men, especially as greed and betrayal take center stage, gives the story some weight, and the reveal that the opal is actually a monster egg is a strong twist. The problem isn't the material itself, but it's the way that it's isolated from the kaiju narrative. Gamera and Barugon don't really enter the picture until nearly the halfway mark if you forget about the opening scene, which creates a sense of detachment. It's a film that's only 88 minutes long, and that delay is very hard for me to overlook when half the movie, if not more, is dedicated to strictly human stuff with no monsters whatsoever. Once Barugon does appear, though, the film regains its footing. His design stands out among other monsters of the era. The detailing on the suit gives him weight and presence, and the filmmakers make smart use of scale to make him feel massive. His abilities are also very inventive compared to other monsters of the time. The freezing breath is a striking visual, and the rainbow beam that fires from his back is so strange and colorful that it becomes oddly beautiful. It's refreshing to see a monster with powers that don't fall back on fire or electricity. For a 1960s kaiju film, there's real imagination in how Barugon is presented. Naturally, comparisons to Barugon from Toho's Frankenstein vs. Barugon come up. The names are nearly identical. Both monsters are quadrupeds, and there's even a resemblance to Anguirus and Barugon's posture and movements. This has led some to accuse Daiei of copying Toho, but I don't think that argument necessarily holds up in this very instance. Sure, Gamera was designed to ape off of the success of Godzilla. The thing is, the production timelines overlapped here, and there's no clear evidence that Gamera vs. Barugon or Frankenstein vs. Barugon influenced one or the other. Similar ideas appearing in close proximity happens all the time in film. Take The Cat Concerto and Rhapsody Rabbit, two nearly identical animated shorts that were produced in the same year by different studios, each accusing the other of plagiarism or theft. Coincidence doesn't always imply imitation. That said, I get why people associate the Gamera franchise with being a Godzilla knockoff. Naming your monster Barugon and releasing it a year after Barugon just doesn't help the optics, and even if it wasn't intentional, the comparisons are inevitable. The Gamera series has always struggled to break out of that shadow, and choices like this have only reinforced the perception over time. I don't think it's fair to dismiss the entire franchise entirely on those grounds, but I understand why it's earned that reputation. The English dub of Gamera vs. Barugon presents a mix of improvements and missteps. One of the most noticeable issues is the pronunciation of Gamera as Gamera.
Gamera was lured into a rocket which was sealed and shot to Mars.
Oh, Gamera! Gamera!
Gamera senses that a volcano is erupting on the other side of the world.
This alteration probably stems from a deliberate choice to avoid confusion with the word camera, the English word, similar to how Puckman was changed to Pac-Man in the US to prevent vandalism, altering the P to an F. Fuckman. Additionally, the spelling was actually modified to Gamera with 2 M's, further distinguishing it from camera. Despite these changes, the dub performances in this installment feel way more natural compared to those in Gamera the Giant Monster. While not exceptional, there's a noticeable uptick in quality, making the dialogue a lot more palatable and less stilted.
How can you be sure? 1945 is a long time ago.
The cave is supposed to be haunted by some beast called the Ava.
In the United States, the film was released under the title War of the Monsters. This generic title does very little to convey the unique aspects of the film, and contributes to the perception of the Gamera series as being derivative of other kaiju franchises. In my opinion, I hate it because the title lacks specificity and fails to capture the distinctiveness of the Gamera-Barugon conflict to the point where I forget which movie War of the Monsters even is in the first place. The US release history of Gamera vs. Barugon is convoluted. Initially, American International Television acquired the film and dubbed it into English in Rome, Italy. This version was offered to US television stations in 1967 as part of a syndication package with other sci-fi B-movies. Later in 1987, King Features Entertainment released the film to television and VHS under the original title of Gamera vs. Barugon. The film's multiple English dubs and title changes have unfortunately led to inconsistencies in pronunciation and branding, further complicating its identity in the international market. These alterations, while perhaps well-intentioned, have contributed to the perception of the Gamera series as lacking the cohesiveness and prestige of its temporary kaiju counterparts. And with all of that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick. You are watching Firewood Media. This is part 2 of my massive Gamera retrospective project. I'm going in order of release, so up next is 1967's Gamera vs. Gaios. Big thank you to our channel members for making videos like these possible. Their names are listed here on screen. For $1.99 a month, the executive producer tier gives you loyalty badges, custom emojis, early access to new videos, like this one, exclusive members-only content, and the occasional shout-out. You'll also get your name in the credits of every film project that I make, because if you're supporting it, then you're producing it. I just put out a short film called Canopsia, and if you were a channel member, your name could have been in the credits. There's also the custom video tier at $50 a month. You could just do this one time and then cancel if you just want one video. You get everything in the executive producer tier, as well as a custom video on any topic that you choose. If you want a deep dive, a weird theory, or just something fun, I will make it happen as long as it's YouTube safe and not wildly illegal or expensive to produce. And it has to kind of fit the general vibe of the channel. It will be posted publicly, but you get access to it first. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace out.